Now, our final speaker before we move to our panel discussion with you all is Professor Mark Rosenthal. So, Professor Rosenthal is a Senior Staff Specialist in the Department of Medical Oncology at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, and he's Director of the Parkville Cancer Clinical Trials Unit. So Mark is actually responsible for running over, at the moment, I think, Mark, over 180 clinical trials in this facility. So, and a very, very experienced clinical trialist. So, Mark, we look forward to hearing your perspective about clinical trials in Victoria.
Thank you. And James doesn't need to wear a jacket, nor do I. Look, the talk so far really resonated with me. Every comment is virtually something I think of, except, Julie, the last bit about giving your life some control. I think that's something I hadn't thought about, just understanding where you are and what you're doing. I think that's a really important point. But what you'll hear from me is actually echoing what's been said by all three speakers so far. I turned 58 last week, and I reckon for 50 years I've been dressing myself. So you might want to have a vote at some stage about the tie and the shirt, because my wife has come back from New York and she's now putting shirts and ties together. This one I put on in the dark this morning. And I'll tell you why. Actually, the comment about why do patients do better on clinical trials, it's because they don't get the Mark Rosenthal near enough is good enough approach, which is how I do things at home. And it's exactly right. It's all protocol driven. It's very precise. So the Mark Rosenthal near enough is good enough with the dose or what I'm much better with clinical trials. So I'm just going to start off by showing some numbers. So this is the Australia-New Zealand Clinical Trial Registry, 10 years of data. 10,000 trials, not just cancer, this is all trials. 5 million patients have been on trials. About 20% of the trials are cancer trials. About half are drug trials. There's lots of health economics. Don't know if anyone's particularly interested, but for every dollar that's put into clinical trials and clinical research, you get $5 in health benefits. $1 billion in commercial investments. About 40% are sponsored. And there are some interesting trends too, which we need to be aware of. More non-commercial trials. So we talked about the investigator-initiated trials already. And this is interesting for me because maybe 10 years ago, our clinical trials unit said, you know what, I reckon we're going to be doing more of the phase 1, the early drug development trials, rather than the big phase 3s. And in fact, it's increased dramatically from 9% to 22%. So not that interesting, is it? Because it's all personal. And I was delighted to see one patient up there on a photo with myeloma, 2 patients here. It is all personal. And I'm going to tell 3 very quick stories. Peter B, Peter W and Sarah. So Peter Barlow, he had a glioblastoma. That's a brain cancer. That's what I do. It's an interesting point. I was thinking, Grant, when you said you were looking at what's got so much better, brain cancer, what I do, 1 new drug in 20 years. Does that mean we're not doing well? No. Actually, the care of brain cancer patients has improved unbelievably from what it was. And part of that is the clinical trial portfolio. So this was a drug that was a first-in-human study, first patient in the world. Here it is, AMG 595 actually. I don't care what anybody knows about science or biochemistry, that looks like a poison. And that's sure enough what it was. And Peter Barlow was brave enough to sit in a chair in our day centre, put his arm out and say, give me that drug. First patient in the world to get that thing. Pretty amazing. And in fact, he was fortunate, and it's another point. Not every drug that goes into a trial ends up at market. So, 90% of patients don't always respond. The companies say, that's it. They're not going ahead. You can do the phase 1, but not the phase 2 and the phase 3. But that doesn't mean that patients can't benefit from being on a trial, because Peter Barlow was the 1 in 35 patients who responded to that drug. The company killed the drug because it wasn't good enough, but he was fortunate. And there's his cancer sitting back there. 2 years later, none there. Unbelievable. But how brave to put your arm out and take that stuff. And here he is. And one of my great, great moments in my career was bringing the scientist who came up with that drug, John Hill, who I knew, and Peter and his wife, and brought them into a room together. And there were tears. It was a fabulous moment. Peter Ward, how lucky. So, brain cancer again, a drug called Avastin. The Americans thought it was brilliant. I didn't, but anyway. Not that many people responded, but Peter Barlow not only responded, but lived for 2 years. And Peter was a magnificent guy. This is Muhammad Ali getting Peter's signature. Peter was a Herald Sun photographer. He was very famous. He came up with this photo, which was from the Walkley Awards in 1996, and I remembered it. This was at Richmond Tech, I think, and it was forestry protesters, and the police had found this nifty way of rendering protesters unconscious. And Peter took this photo. It's Peter when he was in Vietnam. He took great photos, and some of you might remember the pensioners took their tops off in front of Flinders Street Station. And the other good thing was he used to come to my son's footy and take incredible action photos. So Peter went for 2 years, and that was a surprise. Lucky. This is only a few weeks before his death, and I don't normally go to wakes or pre-wakes, but I'm holding Peter up. He couldn't stand. You can see the chair in the background. This is a cake that looks like a camera. And the Richmond jumper was because Peter was a mental Richmond supporter, and I had to go out and buy this rotten Richmond jumper. So, it was just a magical moment. That was a magical moment to be there. And then Sarah C., how brave. This was just a shocking story. Another brain cancer patient, first time in human studies. So it was the same one as the first patient got. You needed to have a gene abnormality in your cancer to get onto the trial, 1 in 3 chance, and she was actually an excellent candidate in every other way. We needed to get consent to test the tumour, not to get on the trial, but to test the tumour. And it wasn't easy. She came from Murrelbach. She was paralysed down one side. She had 2 little kids, like a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, and getting in and out of the car was almost impossible. Not that impossible that she couldn't go on a trial. Now, I've never shown this slide, and I don't know what Grant will have a stroke probably, but I decided I was going to get consent and give her the opportunity to get onto this trial. And where do we do it? In the car. Now, you've got to be on hospital property. I think that's the rule. So there it is, just outside. So Mum rang me and said, we're just coming around the corner to Grattan Street, and I got consent, not for my benefit, but for Sarah's benefit. And again, a magical moment. So it's all personal. Trial medicine's good medicine. Care is better. Attention to detail is protocol driven. Not the Mark Rosenthal near enough's good enough. Outcomes are better. I'm sure they are. What it does is it provides options and opportunity. I gave a consent form to a patient this morning. Brain cancer, incredible drug. He's thinking about surgery, the trial, okay. So, he's got 2 options, not 1. So trials are about options and opportunities, not feeling like you've got to fly to New York with $500,000 in your pocket to get onto a trial. No, the New Yorkers should be coming here, for my trials anyway. It provides early access to new drugs. So we know that patients do get onto trials here in Australia, in Melbourne, in Victoria, where new drugs are sort of being developed and they get early access. I'll come back to that. And I think we've heard about hope and optimism. The altruism is a really important point. And I said this morning to my patient who said, if it doesn't work on me, maybe it'll help someone else. And I said, that's absolutely right. But I want this drug to work on you. It's about you, not about the next generation or something. The altruism is fantastic. And I really admire that. But the focus is on the patient. And for medical science, what works, what doesn't work, what might work, how to move forward. Global winners are infrequent. Cost a lot of money to run these trials. And winners coming from local science, something that's come up in a lab at Western or St V's or Weehigh, the uni, and take it into the clinic and has been a success, it's very uncommon. But incremental improvements occur all the time. And we saw that with the myeloma studies. But when it happens, it is unbelievable. So this photo, is in so deep in my heart. It was on my old boss's shelf for 25 years. Every time I walked past his room, I saw that photo. So this is Don Metcalf, very famous scientist, my old boss, Dick Fox, a great medical oncologist, George Morstan, the first patient in the world. So just like Peter Barlow, put his arm out and said, give me GCSF. And that is just a magnificent moment in my mind. It's about scientific inquiry, seizing the moment, brilliance, collaboration, training and education, bench to bed, generosity of spirit, mentorship, breakthroughs. Actually, these guys are now forgotten. So, all three of them I worked with for 20 or 30 years. But if you're about 10 or 15 years younger than me, probably not known. So we can't rely on individuals. It's fundamental to our work and our culture. So here's another example, which is actually a little bit more recent. David Vaux was a medical student in my year. He was the class clown, but he happened to discover what a specific gene does, BCL2. We all knew that cancers grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, but no one had actually thought cancers don't die properly. And David Vaux discovered that cancers don't die. In fact, what happened was the cells had that gene in them. He couldn't be bothered coming in over the weekend and the cells were still alive on the Monday. And someone went, hello, cancer cells don't die. So that was 1988, 30 years ago. Here's a recent photo of me, well, 20 years ago. But this sort of captures that first photo I showed. People around the bedside working together. And the guy in the middle, Andrew Roberts, has worked on this program probably for 20 odd years. And this was one of the most unbelievable papers I think that's ever come out of Australia. And Andrew Roberts was the first author. It's a new drug called venetoclax. It's a drug that's used in lymphomas and other haematological malignancies. It's revolutionised the field such that, that these are local people. John Seymour from here, St V's, Contam. These are New England Journal papers, the most revealed journal in the world. Unbelievable that this has come out of Victoria. Like the GCSF, but it's 30 years later. In fact, I love the story Andrew tells of the very first patient who got venetoclax. He had lymph glands like this. And Andrew, they gave the treatment. Andrew went back a couple of hours later and said, just to make sure he hadn't killed him, done something terrible, there was some terrible side effect. And Andrew said, how are you going? And the guy said, yeah, it's working. 4 hours later. So this is just a remarkable breakthrough, but it is rare. Okay, negative trials. Oh, gee, we didn't get a positive trial. Those special curves were shown, which are like that. They're like that. That's a bad thing? No, it's not. Because negative trials aren't negative. This drug Avastin in brain cancer, the Americans in the late 2007 thought it was unbelievable. That's because they couldn't read the MRI scans properly. We were pretty suspicious that it wasn't working so well. Because the Americans said, this drug, which is an expensive drug, $3,500 a month, you might be on it like Peter Ward. Actually, it's a good point to make, Mark. Peter Ward was on it for 2 years, $3,500 times 24, it's a lot of money. Early access to a new treatment. So the Americans always said the response rate's high. You've got to give it with some chemotherapy, so extra toxicities and side effects. And you've got to continue, when the tumour's getting worse, you've got to keep going with the Avastin and just change the chemotherapy. Otherwise your brain's going to explode or do something terrible. Right, so we did a trial in Australia, and this is one of these trials that was already mentioned. Not really sponsored by one of the pharmaceutical companies. This is an investigator-initiated trial. Catherine Field was the young PI, did a brilliant job. Biggest and best brain cancer trial ever done in Australia. 120 patients in about 12 months. And we came up, it was called Cabaret, we came up with this. Response rate high? No. Low. Give with chemotherapy was essential? No, it wasn't. Continue at progression? No, and don't be ridiculous. So Catherine actually, when she started to present this, kept saying it's a negative study, sorry, it's a negative study. I said, no, we have challenged 3 dogma and we have changed international practice through a negative study. So it's not negative. It's actually challenged dogma and made a huge difference to the way we look after our patients. So there's been a few questions about what are we going to do and how do we do things, and how might we get the patient from Mildura, my favourite regional centre. When I do this talk, I always say from Mildura to Mallacoota, we want to try and help all of those patients. And so the VCCC Strategic Research Plan has just got underway. That's $20 million from state government, thank you, to try and increase and improve clinical trials. We want to expand clinical trials for patients. I mean, this is about research discoveries and new treatments, and they're going to drive our clinical care. We've got some fancy new approaches to clinical trials, things that we haven't done before. Registry trials, a new way of doing clinical trials. Tele-trials, hello. Let's try and make sure that you don't have to travel all the way down to Sunshine. Somehow work out. So we do telehealth. That's becoming a little bit more regular. We do it in our clinic. This morning, my neurosurgeon, I could hear she was doing a teletrial because she was shouting at the computer screen. I had to go in and say, indoor voice, please. So we're doing telehealth. We're going to change it to teletrials. Let's get the patients in Mildura having their trials done in Mildura. It's not easy, it's complicated, but we're going to get there. Awareness of clinical trials. You were talking about, James mentioned as well, how do you fall into it? Most people fall into a clinical trial. If you come and see me, it's clinical trial, clinical trial, clinical trial. But not everybody thinks like that. And not everybody's aware of clinical trials. I want a system where you just push a button and up it comes. It's easy. I want posters, advertising, I don't care. I want everybody to have access to clinical trials. This is adolescent and young adults. There's a problem if you are 17, 500 metres down the road, you can't get onto most clinical trials because the bottom age limit is 18. So if you're 17 and 18, there's a huge disparity. So we're going to get rid of that disparity. Most cancer trials are done by medical oncologists, people like me, haematologists, not really by physios, not really by occupational therapists. Radiation oncologists do them, surgeons struggle a bit. They don't have the wherewithal, the experience, the expertise. We've been doing it for 30 years since that original photo. We've worked out how to do it. It's core business for us. And so what we want is other groups to become, slowly but surely, experts in the field. Palliative care, for example. Very small clinical trial program in cancer. Wow, what an opportunity. And we know patients, even in their last month of life, are prepared to go on clinical trials and want to do so. We're going to try and make things more efficient, of course, and this comes back, investigator-initiated trial capacity building. This is the idea that it's not just Roche, BMS, Pfizer doing the clinical trials. It'll be investigators, doctors, physios, occupational therapists, doesn't matter who, come up with a good idea, give them help to take it into a protocol, get the protocol running, and come up with some interesting questions. We've got a simple one in brain cancer. You're supposed to give 6 months of chemotherapy after the original surgery. There's been a sort of a frame shift. So in America, of course, double must be better. Everyone gets 12. That does not make sense. Equipoise, which is the word used, should it be 6, should it be 12? Well, we're going to do a trial 6 versus 12. I'm cool about that. I don't know which one's better. I do know it would be great if it's just 6, because that's 6 extra months patients have been doing unnecessarily. So we can do trials that no pharmaceutical company is going to do. What are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve access. So from Mildura to Mallacoota, you have the same access if you live around the corner in Errol Street, North Melbourne. Everybody has the same opportunity. And that then falls into participation. No one has to go on a clinical trial if you don't want to. Clinical trials are there as opportunities, other options. And we want people, wherever they might be in Victoria, to have those opportunities. And that's about equity. So it's no different wherever you are, whether you speak English or not, whether you old or young, everybody gets the opportunity. And investigators. Medical oncologists and haematologists have run clinical trials in cancer medicine for 30 or 40, 50 years. But where's the good question about exercise, for example? Many of you would have seen, it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, exercise, big deal. We sort of knew that. Am I going to do an exercise study? No. Look at me. It's not what I do. So where's the physiotherapist or the, phys ed trainer, whoever? Where's the physio who can help us with the idea about exercise, and then we help them come up with a new strategy? How do you find out about clinical trials? I've said already, there should be a push of a button somewhere. There should be posters everywhere. Patients should be walking into a hospital and saying, which trial can I go on? Not everybody has to go on a trial. I think the best thing is ask your doctor, which is, I think, what you both said. Ask your doctor. I think the second most important thing is ask your doctor, and third is ask your doctor. There are ways and means. So the Cancer Council of Victoria has got a website, a clinical trials link, which is very good. But I think you've got to put pressure on your doctor. And if they don't know, ask someone else. Most medical oncologists, haematologists, cancer specialists are pretty aware of the environment. If they don't know themselves, they know to ask me or Grant or someone else. So I'm just going to finish up. Trial medicine is good medicine. That's my aphorism, but I've changed it to great medicine. You do get looked after better. Grant, I'm sure, is going to ask some interesting questions. I do know that we did an exit study, patients who came off clinical trials and came back to me. And of course, what was the answer? They didn't like coming back to me because they've been looked after so well on the trial, and I can't provide that sort of care. Trial medicine exists for our patients. It is entirely personal. And I keep this is just one page of my list on my board in front of my desk. I see it every day, and that's a list of maybe a quarter of the patients I've ever put on a clinical trial. And occasionally I just run my eye down it. I think, can't remember her, can't remember him, can't remember her. And then I go, wow, what a magic person that was. So that list is very important to me, and it sits there right in front. So I'll finish and leave the front.